Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and we continue with part 3 of my Takashi Miike filmography review. There's no reason to dilly-dally around tonight, so let's get right to it. And remember, all of the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. Our first film this evening is an impressive one, and that is Rainy Dog from 1997. This is a Japanese crime drama. Now remember, this is the second film of Takashi Miike's Black Society trilogy, which also includes Shinjuku Triad Society from 1995 and Ley Lines from 1999. Now in my opinion, Rainy Dog is the best of the bunch. The film begins with the main character, Yuji, being fired from his Yakuza syndicate. Soon he finds work in Taiwan for another boss, solely as a pay-per-hit assassin, killing members of other syndicates. His life starts to become more complicated when an ex-girlfriend drops his son off at his house. His son, who's a mute, begins to follow him around, and he actually witnesses him shoot a man who is having lunch with his wife and infant son. Afterward, our protagonist strikes up a relationship with a prostitute, and things get even more complicated when the brother of Yuji's recent victim, a lawyer, approaches his brother's Yakuza syndicate to request heading the revenge attack on our protagonist. So I must remind you that this Black Society trilogy is not a trilogy that requires you to watch the films in chronological order. It's more of a thematic trilogy, which means that they're not connected by the same story or same story arc, so you can watch them in any order. However, Rainy Dog does have some similarities to its predecessor, Shinjuku Triad Society. The most notable one is the emphasis on urban slum environments, which gives a very gritty aesthetic and environment to explore. Another similarity is the theme of the rootless individual, as Tom Mess describes it, in this case presented by our Japanese protagonist, who is exiled by the Yakuza to Taiwan. So we end up with another multicultural story, which is yet another similarity. On the other hand, one thing that is very different about Rainy Dog is that it lacks the extreme sex and violence that were showcased in Shinjuku Triad Society. As I mentioned in my review of that film, I thought it went a bit overboard on those elements and became a bit too sleazy for its own good. Rainy Dog does not suffer from that flaw because it's a much classier film, I guess you could say, despite having some gun violence at times. Now, this is a deliberately paced drama, but the character development is more than adequate enough to make the viewer care for our protagonists. This isn't a typical father-son bonding story either, since they rarely interact directly. The son kind of just follows the father around almost like a puppy dog. I think that might have been an inspiration for the title of the film, Rainy Dog. But they still have enough chemistry that's necessary to provide some dramatic impact, and I think that works. The relationship with a prostitute offers a bit more dialogue between the characters, but is still fairly unconventional, as you'll see if you decide to watch this. Performances in this are very good across the board. Our lead actor is Sho Aikawa, who has made a number of appearances in Miike's films as well as Kiyoshi Kurosawa's films. And this is one of his very best performances, I think. He is at his most human, so to speak, and he really nails the role in this. Rainy Dog also adds some atmosphere by showcasing a lot of rainy imagery, hence the title. So, really in a nutshell, I do think that this film is a must-see if you're serious about exploring this director. It's the best of the trilogy, as I said before. It has a very nice balance between the criminal underworld stuff, the character development, and I really like this one. Very good movie. Now, in terms of availability, Rainy Dog is widely available on DVD. And remember, they have a 3-disc box set available now with all 3 of the films in this trilogy. That's a pretty good deal. And pretty spiffy extra features on that as well. Alright, our next film tonight, unfortunately, is not even close to being on the same level as Rainy Dog. And I am referring to Full Metal Yakuza from 1997 still, a Japanese crime action drama. Now, after being brutally murdered in a gangster-style execution, a man finds himself brought back to life by a mad scientist and rebuilt as a robot-human hybrid with a serious thirst for vengeance and the tools to carry it out. He's bulletproof and super strong, and eventually escapes from the scientist. This allows him to search for those responsible and get his revenge. To no one's surprise, this flick takes its cues from RoboCop, but presents it within a Miike prism, so to speak. In my opinion, it's an experiment that falls flat on its face. So the first half of Fullmetal Yakuza serves to set up the primary plot and the robotic stuff. There are a bunch of scenes where the scientist works on the protagonist's robo-body. There's some decent special effects there, I think. There are a few quirky moments, too, one of which involves the protagonist's new diet regimen that's necessary to sustain his power levels. When the action finally arrives, it's merely okay at best and does not hit hard at all. The action choreography is very inept, as the main character just kind of wildly swings his arms around to knock guys over. It looks really bad. Some online reviewers have alleged that this movie is very violent for some unknown reason that I cannot comprehend. There's a little blood spray here and there, but nothing noteworthy, outside of one completely unnecessary rape scene that really irritated me. And speaking of that rape scene, it was totally in bad taste, especially in a movie that's this stupid from start to finish. It's one thing to use rape in something like Shinjuku Triad Society, but Fullmetal Yakuza is a much lighter and sillier action flick, and you chuck in a disgusting scene like that? I'm sorry, but Miike deserves a smack in the back of the head for that decision. Fullmetal Yakuza is the perfect example of when not to insert a rape scene into your movie. So, yeah, that did not play well with me. Also, there are some sections of the second half that drag out and are kind of boring. You might expect the action to continue throughout once it starts ramping up, but that's really not the case. And considering the bare-bones story and characters, it becomes a big problem. Also, the lead actor is really weak, I thought. He gave a weak performance here. He hasn't been in that many movies, and I haven't seen him in that many, and I can kind of see why. So no, I most certainly do not recommend Fullmetal Yakuza. Watch something else from Miike. You have plenty to choose from, right? Plenty to choose from. Now, DVD availability of this is that it's widely available if you want to check it out. All right. We're on our way back up here with the next one. This one's very good. And that is called The Bird People in China from 1998. This is a drama. This visual allegory of desperation and longing chronicles the adventure of a Japanese businessman sent on a trip to a Chinese village where he discovers a girl with a haunting voice and a secret that allows men to fly. Environmentalism, human value, and the perception of wealth are among the themes explored in this soul-searching drama. This businessman is sent by his company, actually, for the specific purpose of investigating claims of a priceless vein of jade, but his priorities become entangled with the local people. The protagonist is played by Masahiro Motoki, who you may recognize from films such as Departures from 2008, Gemini from 1999, Gonin from 1995, and most recently The Long Excuse from 2016. The second actor is Renji Ishibashi, who has over 300 acting credits on IMDb, so I'm sure you will recognize him when you see him, if you've seen basically any Japanese films before. And the third main actor here is Mako, who has appeared in some fun American films like Taking Care of Business from 1990 and Conan the Destroyer from 1984. So Renji plays like a tough debt collector who gives Masahiro's character a rough time because Masahiro's company owes him some money, and he may be on the verge of discovering that big stash of jade stones. Mako's character serves as like their guide to this desolate village. So we have a solid trio here that really helps to make this one memorable. There's definitely a road film aspect to this. Actually, it takes them about 40 minutes of screen time to actually get to the village. But that journey is engaging, and when they finally reach the village, the bird people element is immediately introduced. Apparently, there's like this small school within this village that teaches people how to fly using little contraptions. And the teacher just so happens to be a beautiful girl with beautiful eyes. So our three protagonists, immediately become enchanted by her and want to know more about this odd custom. And that's basically the film in a nutshell. Some of the comedic elements work well during the earlier moments, and the transition to drama is very fluid here. There's also lots of beautiful mountain forest environments, so, if you want to get away from the city-type environment that you're in as a viewer, this is something to check out. There are some Japanese films that I do consider getaway films. I just covered The Bow, which is a South Korean film. That's kind of a getaway film because you could just put your mind out at sea. Well, The Bird People in China is kind of the same way. You could just put your mind into the forest, you know what I mean? Which I kind of like sometimes. Pacing is slow, but not detrimental to the enjoyment of this film, because everything's well made about it. This is a very light and quiet film that's likely to impress critics of this director, and I would say that this is another higher priority title for you to seek out if you want to sufficiently explore this director. So the availability of The Bird People in China is that it is moderately available on DVD. The DVD copies out there are getting more expensive, I saw, so it might be out of print or going out of print. Alright, so we're going back and forth here. Very good movie, bad movie. Very good movie, bad movie. So we have another lame one to cover. If you're unfamiliar with Miike's filmography from around this period, I'm attempting to steer you into the right direction so you can find his better stuff and avoid his worse ones, at least until later. And another one to avoid would be Andromedia from 1998. This is a drama thriller. So when a teenager dies in a traffic accident, her scientist father uses his experimental technology, which logs memory and personality as bits and bytes, to generate a virtual version of her, but an unethical corporation has evil plans for his handiwork, and soon his virtual daughter is on the run from some shadowy killers. Now, back in the day, there was this ridiculous belief in internet circles, a belief that still might exist, actually, that Miike sold out with one missed call in 2003. It was alleged at that time that one missed call was the moment where Miike went from a respectable filmmaker to a lazy mainstream director. Now, this criticism led to an almost equally ridiculous claim that one missed call was actually a satire in disguise from Miike's defenders. I really don't understand either argument at all. But in any case, if anyone had ever bothered to watch Andromedia, which was released on DVD way back in 2004, they probably would have pointed to this film as Miike's first mainstream sellout project, assuming that his early direct-to-video stuff does not count as selling out. And to be clear, I'm not one of these people who thinks that Miike sold out at any given point in time, because he's never been picky when selecting films to direct. I think he mentioned at one point that he does not choose his films, but his films choose him. I mean, he'll basically direct anything that seems interesting or fun for him to direct. That's just the way he's always been, you know what I mean? But the point I'm trying to make with Andromedia is that, yet again, people were misunderstanding Miike out of ignorance, and that happens quite a bit. Now, Andromedia stars not one, but two teen pop groups, Speed and Da Pump. Yeah. And guess what? We even get a random, cheesy, lame musical number in the middle of the film, for no good reason. Also, the movie employs the most generic ideas and contemplations regarding life and cyber technology. For example, it uses the most incredibly cliched visuals to express these concepts. You know, like a lot of ones and zeros peppered around, and as well as shots of like electrified wires inside computers. You know that shot where like the camera dips into the computer and it follows all the wires, and you can see like the electricity running through them. And it uses stuff like that. Stuff that feels incredibly outdated nowadays, and even outdated back then. Next, there seems to be quite a bit of dull filler and dialogue to sit through. During much of this movie, nothing really happens. That's a problem. The pacing drags and the dialogue is banal and uninteresting. It's simply boring to watch and lacks the energy that Miike usually brings with his direction. Now, if I was forced to point out just a few positives, I would say that there are a few marginally fun cameos and supporting actors in this. Cinematographer Christopher Doyle is the villain, which is both unexpected and somewhat amusing. You also get some appearances from Naoto Takanaka, the teacher from Swing Girls, and he recently starred in Samurai Gourmet, and Tamaro Taguchi, Tetsuo the Iron Man. But those actors are not in the film long enough to make an appreciable difference. Also, there is one good stunt involving an exploding car, and that's about it. From what I've said, Andromedia actually sounds rather harmless, right? Just kind of cheesy mainstream film. Maybe it is just a cheesy, mediocre movie for teens, but I really don't think we're that lucky here. This is actually deceptively... It's a deceptive form of torture. When I rewatched this fairly recently, I found it to be incredibly difficult to sit through. At one point, I found myself suffering horribly at the utter lack of entertainment that was being presented to me. And it was at that moment that I had realized that the runtime had not even reached the midway point. So, yeah, this is pretty bad stuff. Andromedia is sleep-inducing crap, is how I would describe it. If you choose to watch it, good luck to you. And it is, let's see the availability here, it is moderately available on DVD. You can mostly find it used. Alright, let's continue our trend. Let's go back up for a good one again. This one is very good as well. This is Blues Harp, a Japanese crime drama. So Miike directs this film about an ambitious Yakuza named Kenji, who befriends a harmonica-playing bartender named Chuji after he helps Kenji elude a rival gang. Now this is despite the fact that Chuji has connections with the opposing gang. Their friendship is threatened by Kenji's plans for advancement in the gang, as well as by his bodyguards, who are growing jealous of Chuji, who is a very talented musician who recently met a pretty lady and is growing in popularity at the local club. Now this begins with a fun montage of images and music, something Miike liked to do a lot in his early years. The Dead or Alive trilogy contributes some of his best montages, by the way, which we'll get to later. Story and characters in Blues Harp seem simplistic at first, but there's quite a bit going on beneath the surface here. For example, make sure you pay attention to how our lead actors act and what they do after having sex with women. That's step one to understanding these guys and how they fit in or maybe don't fit into the society around them. There's a lot of content and character development here to chew on, but some of it's beneath the surface, and you got to pay attention. There's also a lot of realistic character interaction here. You really get a feel of how these people live their lives. Pacing is leisurely, but that's no problem because the film is absorbing and interesting throughout. The ending, I think, is a classic, and it's executed with energetic panache. Our two lead actors are Seiichi Tanabe and Hiroyuki Ikuchi, and they are both very good in this. Tanabe does a lot of TV work nowadays, so you may not be familiar with him, but Ikuchi is probably more recognizable to international viewers since he appeared in films like Ip Man, X-Cross, Space Travelers, and Charisma. And as an added bonus, much of the plot takes place in a bar with lots of catchy music being performed. You don't have to worry about that speed and da pump crap that you're listening to when you watch Andromedia. This is good quality music in Blues Harp, which you may expect, and that's what you're going to get. There's really not much more I can say about this. Blues Harp is a very impressive film that has gone under many people's radars, but there's a reason for that. Never got a proper release in the United States. I'm not sure internationally, but availability on Blues Harp is that it's difficult to find, but it is available currently on YouTube without subtitles, but it might be worth checking out. Especially if you have Tom Mess's book, Agitator, you can watch the movie and read his synopsis, and it's very detailed. You'll know everything that's going on. Alright, so our trend means that we're going to hit another crappy film here, right? No, we're not. We'll save another crappy one for the last title tonight. Our next two films are actually pretty good. They're good. And this one is Young Thugs, Nostalgia, 1998 Japanese drama. So Miike directs this film about a young boy who experiences the joys and conflicts of childhood. Now, I've read that this is actually a prequel to Young Thug's Innocent Blood. So, yeah, this is the plot here basically involves a resilient 6th grader who endures the seemingly endless battles with local punks. At home, he also has to cope with his overstressed, dysfunctional family. So his innocence quickly erodes en route to an absurd comical adulthood. So as I mentioned, I read somewhere that this is actually a prequel, at least in concept, to Young Thug's Innocent Blood from 1997. And I think this is actually a superior film to that one. I think the reason for this is because the characters were a little bit more interesting here. Maybe I just have a personal bias for films about young kids, but I think the young kids in Nostalgia are more interesting than the teenagers were in Innocent Blood. And maybe it's because you don't see little kids placed in situations like this in many movies. This has a somewhat atypical feel, like, a lot of Miike's films. This one introduces like violent fathers, strippers, and other elements that one would not usually find in a movie about a kid this young, but it's all introduced in a very, I would say, a classy, charming kind of way. The protagonist's father is played by Naoto Takanaka, again, who recently starred in Samurai Gourmet. He plays an absolutely terrible character in this, like a terrible person, but his performance is so good that it's difficult to dislike him. That's how good he is in this. There's actually a domestic abuse scene that ends in an effectively humorous moment, and that's not easy to do. So that's an accomplishment. Viewers should understand that this is a deliberately paced movie, but it's pretty solid. It's more of an everyday living kind of experience. And overall, it's good stuff. I recommend it. So Young Thug's Nostalgia is moderately available on DVD. Now, before we continue, I'd like to make a point here, and it's kind of an important one. The criticism I hear about Miike nowadays is that he does not make good movies anymore. We'll address that argument later in this playlist, but I distinctly remember that the big argument, this is the biggie, okay? You heard about the one missed call thing, Miike sold out on one missed call. That was like a little argument that was kind of stupid. But this one is the big one that I'm discussing now. And the big argument was that he was just a splatter director who relied on shock value to drive his films. And these were arguments that I saw on message boards consistently from, when I started doing this kind of thing, watching these movies, say 2005 through 2009 or so. Well, if you actually look at his filmography like we've done, in 1997 and 1998 alone, he made Rainy Dog, The Bird People in China, Blues Harp, and both of the Young Thugs films. This director is a talent for crafting genuine drama without the need for shocks. And these are films that will likely win over Miike's most hardened critics. But do you know what would happen back in the day on movie message boards during the late 2000s, mid to late 2000s? Let me give you an idea. Someone would make the ignorant assertion that Miike only directed splatter films. Then I would reply and say something like, hey, did you see The Bird People in China? That's not a splatter film. And 9 times out of 10, I would get no response. They would just disappear. It happened all the time. And that's despite the fact that The Bird People in China, Rainy Dog, and both Young Thugs films were all released on DVD widely in the United States back in 2004. You know what I mean? So again, it's a point I want to make in this playlist. We need to understand that we're talking about a director who has a history of being misunderstood and underappreciated, despite being one of the most internationally popular directors that Japan has ever produced. Again, I find it fascinating. So moving on here, we have now reached 1999 in Miike's filmography. Another busy year, it would seem, because this director released 7 movies in 1999 alone. I think that's the most movies he's ever released in one year. So let's check them out. We're going to cover 2 more films tonight, and then we'll finish off 1999 in part 4 of this playlist. Alright, so we're going to finish off the Black Society trilogy with Ley Lines from 1999. This is a crime drama, of course. And again, it's the third film in Miike's Black Society trilogy, which also includes Shinjuku Triad Society from 95 and Rainy Dog, which we just covered, from 97. So the story follows a trio of Japanese youths of Chinese descent who escape their semi-rural upbringing and relocate to Shinjuku, Tokyo, where they befriend a troubled Shanghai prostitute and fall foul of a local crime syndicate. Now, like many of Miike's works, the film examines the underbelly of Japanese society and the problems of assimilation faced by non-ethnically Japanese people in Japan. So to begin, I'd like to point out a few of the similarities that Ley Lines has with its predecessors in this trilogy. The most notable, yet again, is the emphasis on urban environments, which gives it that gritty aesthetic again, and environment. Some of the best scenes take place in the city at nighttime with a plethora of lights on display. I always like shots like that in urban Japanese landscapes, those nighttime shots with all the neon lights and stuff. I always find that to be really atmospheric and fun to look at. Another similarity, yet again, is the theme of the rootless individual, in this case, presented by our protagonist who is of Chinese descent, but lives in Japan and speaks Japanese. Now, there are also a plethora of sex scenes in this one, so it harkens back to Shinjuku Triad Society in that regard. And similar to that film, it does seem a little bit excessive and repetitive, even though it does not sink to the same levels of depravity. If Rainy Dog is the classiest in this trilogy, and Shinjuku Triad Society is the sleaziest, Ley Lines is somewhere in the middle. Now, a young Kazuki Kitamura is the lead actor here. He would later contribute some memorable roles in films like Azumi 1 and 2, Yakuza Like a Dragon, which we'll cover later, and Killers, the recent serial killer film. Now, Tamaruo Taguchi again shows up here. Sho Aikawa and Naoto Takanaka also have supporting roles. So if you're a fan of any or all of these actors, it's definitely a reason to see this. This is a really good cast. I have a few other compliments too. There are a few hilarious beatings to enjoy. Look out for the planter and cat scenes, and I really like the ending to this. I thought it stuck the ending pretty well. My biggest criticism, though, of Ley Lines is that it's probably the weakest in this trilogy in terms of the storyline and the character interaction. There's enough to hold interest, but it does drag out, and there are some patches of dullness to get through. You have to really pay attention to the cultural aspects in this one, which is fine, but it's still rather inconsistent at holding your interest. So in summary, Ley Lines is a bit too drawn out for its own good, in my opinion, but it's still a good film that's worth checking out. So if you're new to the Black Society trilogy, this is what you do. I think you watch Rainy Dog first, because it's my favorite and the best in my opinion. Then you move to Shinjuku Triad Society because it's a pivotal turning point in Miike's career. Then you can check out Ley Lines to finish off the trilogy. Because remember, you don't have to watch these in order. Or another option, it would be really interesting if somebody actually sat down and watched Miike's filmography chronologically. That would be a really interesting experiment that, I wish I could have done if I saw all those movies for the first time. That way you could see the progression. So if you want to watch Shinjuku Triad Society first, that might be an option too, but, excuse me. Rainy Dog's the best. Now, in terms of availability, of course, Ley Lines is widely available, just like the other two. Alright, final film tonight for this evening is widely considered to be one of this director's worst films. Yeah, that's about right. And we're talking about the notorious Silver, a Japanese action thriller. So Jun is seeking revenge on the gangsters who murdered her family while she was away at a karate tournament. She infiltrates a ladies' wrestling league to become the crime-fighting, karate chopping pro wrestler Silver. In her quest for vengeance and justice, she does battle with evildoers and rampant corruption, including a kinky dominatrix and a mysterious dart specialist. Silver's skills also include blade wielding, coin flipping, and costume wearing. Not sure if that plot synopsis was trying to be funny, but it sounds pretty lame. So this is another one of those direct-to-video films that Miike likes to do, and this one I think is one of his worst of that variety. This despite a premise that's capable of producing some trashy fun. I will say that the opening moments are intriguing, okay? Early on, we're actually introduced to a killer who's a Leatherface ripoff. The guy from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He basically reminded me of him, and I'm pretty sure they were ripping him off. And that has lots of potential for some violent mayhem and entertainment value. I mean, from a viewer's perspective, this guy should have shown up at least 3 times during the remainder of the film to stalk our protagonist. Unfortunately, I do not remember what happened to him, and I don't think he even showed up at any point for the remainder of the film. I don't care if you're setting up a sequel with this, that is completely unacceptable. You don't just introduce a Leatherface ripoff villain like that and then never bother to use him again. I don't know. First time I saw this movie and I saw it, I'm like, oh boy, we're in for some fun. And that was like the only fun moment in the whole film. But overall, Silver is a very tedious movie with lots of bondage filler material. So for example, a woman pees into a jug and makes a dude drink it. It's not very entertaining. The stuff isn't even structured or filmed properly. For the purposes of comparison, Takashi Miike's film Flower and Snake from 2004 has some really bizarre sex scenes that are very detailed in terms of procedure, in terms of the S&M type aspects, and are also very nicely shot. I'd watch Flower and Snake over this film any day of the week. And as you might expect, the production values in Silver are very cheap. Consequently, the action is unimpressive as well. I'm certain that any reasonably talented YouTuber could set up a wrestling ring in their backyard and film better matches. The same is true with the fights outside of the ring. Use of body doubles is obvious, and there's nothing remotely memorable here. So this also is one of the most abrupt endings of all time, and I'm not even exaggerating. The ending to this movie is completely unacceptable. I can only assume that it was like intentionally setting up a sequel, but it's simply not satisfying at all as a climax. And that criticism is actually very ironic, because Miike has contributed a handful of intentionally awkward endings that are oddly hilarious. We'll cover some of them later on, quite soon actually in our next video. And I think it's a way of him catching the viewer off guard, while at the same time providing a funny final shot. In the case of Silver, it's probably just a lazy cliffhanger that was setting up a sequel that never happened. To my knowledge, this never got a sequel, thank goodness. Now, the availability of Silver is that it is moderately available. Just, like I say sometimes, just don't even bother. So that's it for this evening. Pretty solid lineup. High priority items from tonight would be Rainy Dog, The Bird People in China, and Blues Harp. After that, you could check out Young Thug's Nostalgia and Ley Lines. So be sure to join me for part 4 of my Takashi Miike filmography review, because it's going to be a bit of a love fest. Part 4 is a bit of a love fest. I'll be reviewing 8 of his movies, none of which are bad, in my opinion. Now, I would say that 3 of those 8 are just merely passable entertainment, kind of a take-it-or-leave-it situation, and I'm probably in the minority on liking those 3 movies. But the other 5 are going to range from legitimately good to awesome. So it's going to be good times. And as always, we will see you next time.